Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. I'd like to talk about a video that Bishop Barron, give a few thoughts on a video that Bishop Barron had put out recently concerning prayer. It's a really good video about prayer. I especially liked it because I'm not very good at praying, frankly. And so there are a bunch of interesting suggestions, and I really liked it. And so I just have a few thoughts I sort of want to add to it. So consider pausing this and going and watching it if you haven't already. I got a link in the description, of course. So the first thing is about, he mentions, this is not quite in order, but he mentions the Jesus prayer, which made me happy because I really like the Jesus prayer. It's the one, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Repeated over and over. There are versions with breathing, but I've never, ever liked focusing on my breath. I tend to hate it quite a lot, in fact. So anyhow, I don't do that part, but just repeating it over and over, it can be very good. It can be very helpful in a variety of circumstances, including, if there are things you have to endure, keeping a child from doing something that it wants to, that it should not do, and they're screaming at you, and, you just have to wait until the temper subsides, and, they'll actually listen to something again. If you're a parent, you recognize this. If not, just trust me. There are a lot of times when children, I'm talking young children, will be screaming, and you just have to wait for that to sort of die down before you can actually interact with them like human beings again. And, so, like, the Jesus prayer can be very good. I did this kind of recently, actually, for that, where, to sort of get yourself through something, to just focus on that, and to focus on it, as Bishop Barron says, it's very centering and helps to keep things in perspective. So, another thing he mentioned was silence. That we live in a very noisy environment, and that silence is very helpful. He says some great things on it. I really, really hope you watch this video. It's excellent. Something interesting I want to mention is that something I've experienced myself is that hunting actually is very good for this. You spend a lot of time in the quiet, and hunting can actually be fairly good for praying. There's always the problem, and it sort of is perennial with prayer, I find, and I've read in other cases, for a lot of people as well, that it's very easy for your mind to wander, but just whenever you do, you notice, you go back and try to pray again. But anyway, just something to consider, if you need more time that's spent silently, consider taking up bow hunting. It's a great excuse to go out and be in a place where it's not very loud. Though that being said, actually, when you're in the woods, it is amazing how loud, quiet woods, it's amazing how loud a leaf falling down hitting the ground can be. You'd think it's not much, but when you're actually in something that quiet, mice walking around are loud, and leaves hitting the ground are quite loud. It's an interesting experience, too. Anyway, good for prayer. So Bishop Barron mentioned, too, that prayer is about being about one thing. And then he tied this into something Kierkegaard said, which I thought very interesting. The saint is a man whose life is about one thing. And then Bishop Barron said, you could say that the saint is a man who prays. And I get what he means, but I actually think it's a slightly unfortunate that he used those exact words. Or at least, in any event, one alternative way of saying the exact same thing would be to say that the saint is a man whose life is a prayer. And I really like that phrasing. I've heard it in someplace else, but it really, I think it really ties those two ideas of prayer as being about one thing, and a saint is a man whose life is about one thing. God, obviously. And it also kind of ties in nicely to the idea of pray always, that the saint is a man who's, where even his actions are prayers. So I just sort of like those sort of tie-ins. So anyway, now the big one, and this is really the just sort of the commentary I have, just a small thing, I think, different perspective, really. Because nothing I'm saying is in any way a contradiction to anything Bishop Barron said, to be absolutely clear. But he talked about how prayers about, that you can talk about, as John John Damascene gave the formulation that prayer is the raising up of the mind and heart to God. And, Bishop Barron endorsed this, but said that it can sound a little too one-sided, that it doesn't take into account God's search for us. And it's a theme Bishop Barron's developed, that the Bible is really primarily the story of God's search for us, not our search for God. And it's an interesting theme he has, and it's very insightful. So he brings us out in the idea of don't just talk, listen. And, of course, there's a lot to be said for that. As I said, I'm not contradicting anything that Bishop Barron said. But there is one thing I think that's worth sort of adding. It is a perspective. While I'm very fond of the Jesus prayer, and my favorite prayer actually is the Glory Be. That's the Glory Be to the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. I like it. Some people joke because it's the shortest, but actually, I'll repeat it over and over. But I like it because in one sense, it is I think, an adequate summary of the whole purpose of life. To enjoy God, basically. But having said that, the Our Father is an endlessly fascinating prayer. And the thing about it, of course, that is so unique is that it is the prayer that God himself gave to us. And so it is, because the disciples said, teach us how to pray. And Jesus said, when you pray, pray like this. And so this is the prayer that God himself prayed. This is the prayer that God himself gave us. And so something at least that I try to do, something I sort of find myself doing in any event, as I pray the Our Father, is to think about it and to really try to understand why it is that we should pray it. And, for each, because it's a collection of, in one sense, it's a collection of prayers, all related in one sense and, very distinguishable in another. And so what I do is, as I pray it, I don't really think of it as me talking, but as trying to find out why I should be saying it. And not in a simplistic sense, but in the full sense of, why really should I be saying this, to try to figure out, what should I be that I would say this, in a sense, on my own. They're just to sort of give you an illustration, I want to go through just a little bit of the Greek version. I don't read Greek. I've learned enough Greek that I can pronounce it and understand a little bit of the grammar and I know a few dozen words really. I worked through a bunch with dictionary though, in this prayer in particular. And, so if you look at the very beginning, and pardon my Greek pronunciation, which is terrible, and this is an odd mixture of my recollection of peasant Greek from my grandfather with what I've heard is a kind of normal Greek ancient Greek pronunciation. So I'm probably the only person who would pronounce it this way. But pater hemon hoentois oranois. So pater hemon, Father our Father, hoentois oranois is who's in his heavens. It's a plural. And so Our Father who art in heaven in the English version. But it's very interesting in that it locates God in his own, in his own dwelling, in a sense. Not in a geographical sense, obviously. But it's interesting that it sort of locates God within his own context. Properly God is only ever understood on his own, not in terms of creation. Hagiastete to onamasu. That's the, hallowed be thy name. Hagiastete, like Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom is the name of a famous church. And it's the verb form, which means, may your name be held holy, which itself is very interesting. That translation, may your name be held holy. That's not my own, some legitimate biblical translation has that. But it really focuses on that idea of holy, and obviously that's not something about God, that's something about us. That is to say, that we have a right relationship to God, so as to regard God as holy, that we regard, because God is holy, so that the idea being, one of the ideas being, obviously, I'm not trying to, define this prayer, but one of the things you can see in it is that we should regard that which is holy as holy. And, this is bringing us into, sort of setting the broken bones straight and bring us into a correct relationship with all that is. Altheto he basileia su. So the next line, thy kingdom come. The interesting thing about here, basileia, is what gets translated as kingdom. The interesting thing about that I found, and I learned this from Greek, is if you look at the verb to rule, it's basileo. That is to say, it's the same word. To rule as a king is the same thing as the word for kingdom. And there's the verb to rule, I mean. And so at least something I found growing up in America, where we don't have kings or anything like it, but very few people really do these days. I thought of a king, but you hear of things like, the United Kingdom. And it at least struck me, and I think it strikes a lot of people, that a kingdom is like a geographical location. We've got so many fairy tales and things like that where there is, a kingdom, and, like you have to save the kingdom or restore the king to the kingdom. But really, in this sense, kingdom means, that place, that area, wherever the rule of the king is respected. And so it really kind of shows when we talk about God's kingdom, thy kingdom come. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I knew clearly it didn't mean like a large landmass moving around, but it was sort of, as a kid, the only reference I had. And I've really come to understand that when we say that kingdom come, that we're referring to the, again, the right order of creation, but that God's rule should be respected throughout creation. That creation should have a proper relationship to God. So you can go on through the prayer. It's very interesting, and maybe someday I'll do a video about it, though there are people much more qualified than I am. But that I hope gives a taste of what I mean, of really trying to contemplate it, get into it such that, I understand it so much that I could have come up with it myself, in a sense. Not in any sense to have, replaced Jesus, but rather to become that creature that I am supposed to be. And that creature that I'm supposed to be would be able to spontaneously create that prayer, in the sense that all men should, all men who are perfect should be able to. And so at least to me, when I say that, I don't really think of it as me talking to God so much as me listening to God. That is, Jesus said this, and I'm repeating it, and then listening to it as I repeat it. And so that one prayer in particular, I think, there's a way of doing it where one is, in some sense, speaking, but at the same time listening. So, anyway, it's just a few thoughts on this. As I said, it's an excellent video. I hope you've already watched it. If not, please go watch it. And if you have watched it, consider watching it again. I watched it about 4 or 5 times. I think it was really good. So, anyway, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.